Welcome to the first episode of Soft Skills That Make Work Work. This is brought to you by JEYPENT Company Limited, a management consulting firm that is based here in Nairobi, Kenya. In this series, we will explore practical skills that go beyond qualifications, looking at the abilities that make people succeed in the workplace and thrive in professional environments. Now, of course, there are quite a number of those, but in this series, we'll only focus on 4, and today we will begin with communication skills. This is arguably the single most important skill in employability. This episode is not really a lecture, and neither is it a formal training, but just a reflection drawing from JEYPENT's experience over the past 10 years, working with organizations and their teams, and also working with young professionals entering the workforce. So, to begin with, why communication matters? Communication is really more than writing and speaking. It is about how others perceive you. It is also about how effectively you convey your ideas and how you respond to information from others. In the workplace, good communication can clarify expectations. Good communications can also build trust with the team you're working with, your colleagues, your supervisors, and it also reduces misunderstandings, particularly in the context of teams, where we have a group of people functioning together towards a common cause. Good communication additionally helps you influence decisions and demonstrate value, because you may have good intentions, you may have good ideas, but unless you can communicate and communicate well, then you are not able to influence much or do much in terms of change. Poor communication can create confusion and quite a bit of frustration, and could also contribute to missed opportunities, even for someone who's very highly skilled technically, so that they know the work, they know what is supposed to be done, but where they cannot communicate effectively, then there's quite a lot that is left to chance. So at JEYPENT, we have seen highly capable young professionals sometimes struggle to translate their knowledge into impact simply because they could not communicate clearly or adapt their message to the audience, the people they were speaking to. Now, there are 3 key aspects of communication to keep in mind that we'll go over in this episode. And the first one is listening and understanding, which is quite primary if you ask me, but you have to understand that communication begins with listening. And as you listen, that ensures that you understand the context and the needs of others, so that you're not just listening to respond, you're listening to also understand and appreciate the views and the perspectives of others. Now, in a meeting, for example, if a colleague might be hinting at a challenge that is not as obvious in their words, but it is important that as you listen, you are able to pick these out, to pick out signals and maybe undertones that they may not say overtly, but are clearly critical to the communication. So the first thing you have to know in communication and learn in communication is the art of listening and listening to understand. The second one is clarity in speaking. Now, speaking is not just speaking. It is possible to speak and say everything you had to say, but nobody quite heard what you wanted them to hear. And that is usually a question of clarity. We experience this a lot, particularly in our work in, as a consulting firm. Sometimes you're doing stakeholders engagements, you're speaking to clients, and just the journey towards clearly understanding what they are saying, or even getting them to clearly articulate what it is they maybe want to communicate has been is usually an interesting bit to the work of consulting, because again, you have to understand your client for you to deliver. So it's important to speak with purpose. avoid unnecessary jargon and technical language. Particularly when you're speaking to people who are not in a particular field. So for example, you're working in the medical world, when you're explaining something even to a patient, you may want to keep off the technical terms and the jargon, because again, the point of communication is to ensure that they actually understand what it is you're trying to communicate. You may also want to keep off unnecessary details. A simple rule of the thumb: before you speak, ask yourself, what do I want the other person to know? And how do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do as a result of this message? So for instance, if you're giving project updates to maybe the project manager, you don't need to go to the granulars. You may just want to focus on the outcomes, the blockers, maybe the next steps, not the whole process or all the steps that are ongoing or have been implemented. However, when you're speaking to the team that is implementing the project, then the details, the granular information is very critical, so that to one party it's a necessary detail and to another it's absolutely relevant. So being able to tell the difference is very, very important. So we have spoken about listening to understand and clarity in your speaking. The third one is written communication. This is in terms of emails, reports, messages, letters, for those who do letters. These are messages that will represent you even when you are not there. The downside, or one of the downsides of written communication, is you are not there to explain yourself. There is no tone for the recipient to read. There is, maybe the non-verbal cues, which are very instrumental in communication. For written communication, they are absent. And therefore, it is very important that when you're writing, that you check for clarity and double check the tone of your communication, because sometimes because it's written, it could come off as overly maybe stiff, maybe overly, could even come off as rude sometimes. So just being able to double check that your tone, you write and then you reread your writing just to hear what the other person will be hearing, and maybe try to assess their perception and adjust that. Then again, you want to check for structure. A practical tip: start with the key message, then go down to providing the necessary context, and then close with a clear next step or an action point. Maybe what was the point of this communication? So, for example, if you're sending maybe an email, for instance, and you want to communicate to whoever is receiving concerning, let's just go with a project. You want to start with what is the objective, what's the aim of this communication. So for example, you'd say, hello and good morning, I am writing to request a meeting with you. Very clear. Then you go down to the details to say, we are still working on the project, we have had a few bottlenecks, and we are piloting a few ideas, and we wanted to just run them by you before we can proceed. Then that is context. Then you close it with perhaps you could indicate a convenient day and time for a meeting. Then we can compare notes, so that communication is clear. It is when the person is done, they are clear on what the objective of the communication was, what they expected to do about that communication, and also the context, because that helps when you're processing information. Now, you don't want to structure your written conversation so that the reader gets lost in the detail. Sometimes you provide too much information that is not well structured, so that the person reading sometimes can tell they received communication about a meeting, but they weren't so clear what about it, or what about the project, or what areas where they were supposed to come in and support. So in terms of reflections and takeaways, developing communication skills is not about perfection, like many skills really. It's about being aware and flexible to adapt. Ask yourself, am I listening enough before I respond? And am I structuring my message clearly? Am I considering the perspective of the person receiving my message? So that even small improvements can make a big difference in employability. Employers notice when someone communicates clearly and adapts to context and is able to listen actively. To summarize, communication is the bridge between what you know and what others understand. And it is as much about listening as it is about speaking. You have to have a clear tone. You have to be clear on what it is you're saying, what it is you want to communicate, and what it is you want the other person to understand, which also sometimes comes with the need to be very contextually aware, so that if you're speaking to certain people, there is an approach you take. If you're speaking to another group of people, that may look a little bit different, although the point could be the same and the action points could be the same, but just how you structure your communication so that it is relevant and clear to the people you are targeting. Now, in the next episode, we will be exploring another important factor in employability, and that will be teamwork and collaboration. Thank you for listening to this episode on soft skills that make work work. This is the first episode, and these are reflections brought to you by JEYPENT Company Limited. We are committed to supporting young professionals and indeed people who are growing within their professional spaces with practical human-centered skills for the workplace. My name is Julia Irongo. See you next time.